They made their way around the house to the back door, which was gaping open. "Check that way." Clay gestured to his right as he ran left. John struck close to the wall, peering into doorways as he passed them. "Charlie!" he cried. "Charlie!" Clay echoed, entering the master bedroom. "Charlie! Charlie!" He arrived at the front door. He swung it wide open and stepped outside, half expecting to catch someone fleeing the scene. "Clay, did you find her?" he shouted as he raced back inside. Clay walked briskly back into the living room, shaking his head. "No, but she was here. The bed was unmade, and there was dirt all over the floor. And these..." He held up Charlie's sneakers. John nodded grimly, only now noticing the trails of dirt strewn through the house. He glanced again to the front door. "She's gone," John said, his voice catching in his throat. He looked at the older man. "Now what?" he asked. Clay just stared at the floor and said nothing. "Clay!" John repeated. His alarm grew as the older man stared down at the dirty floorboards, apparently lost in thought. John put a hand on his arm, and Clay startled. He looked as if he just realized he wasn't alone. "We have to find her," John said urgently. Clay nodded, springing back to life. He broke into a run, and John followed close at heel, barely making it into the passenger seat before Clay started the engine and took off, speeding down the half-made road. "Where are we going?" John shouted. He was still struggling to close the door against the wind. It flapped like a massive wing, pulling against him as Clay swerved down the hill. Finally, John yanked it shut. "I don't know," Clay said grimly. "But we know about how far they can get." He drove wildly back down the hill and out to the main road, flipping on his police lights. They went less than a mile before he turned quickly onto a small, unpaved lane. John's shoulder banged hard against the door. He gripped his seatbelt as they barreled down the trail, high brush scraping the sides of the car and thumping the windshield. "They have to come through here," Clay said. "This field is right in the middle of the path between that house and the next area on the map. We just have to wait for them." He stopped the car abruptly, and John jerked forward. Together, they got out of the car. Clay had stopped at the edge of an open field. There were trees scattered here and there, and the grass was tall, but there were no crops and no livestock grazed. John walked out into the open, watching the grass ripple like water in the wind. "You really think they'll come by here?" John asked. "If they keep moving the direction they've been going," Clay said. "They have to." Long minutes passed. John paced back and forth in front of the car. Clay positioned himself closer to the middle of the field, ready to run in any direction at moment's notice. "They should have been here by now," John said. "Something's wrong." He glanced at Clay, who nodded. The sound of the engine car rose from the distance, growing louder. They both froze. Whoever it was, they're coming fast. John could hear branches whipping against the car's body and an irregular percussion. After a few seconds, the car shot out of the lane and screeched to a halt. Jessica! John walked toward the car. Where's Charlie? Jessica asked, stepping out of the grass. How did you find us? Clay demanded. I called her. John put in quickly. From the restaurant, right after I talked to you. I've been driving all over the place. I'm lucky I found you. Why are we stopped here? Their routines cross us through here, John explained, but she looked skeptical. What does that mean? How do you know? John glanced at Clay, neither of them looking confident. They have her already, right? Jessica said. So why would they keep going toward her dorm? Clay closed his eyes, putting a hand to his temples. They wouldn't, he said. He looked up at the sky, the wind battering across his upturned face with a raw touch. So they could be anywhere now, Jessica added. We can't predict what they're doing anymore, John said. They got what they wanted. And she wanted this? She planned this? Jessica said, her voice rising. What's wrong with you, Charlie? She turned back to John. They might not have wanted her here. It could have been anyone. So why did she have to go up there? Like some kind of sacrifice, John said quietly. She can't be dead, Jessica muttered, her voice shaky even under her breath. We can't think like that, John said sternly. We'll form a perimeter, Clay said. Jessica, you and John take your car and start driving that way, he pointed. I'll loop back the other direction. We'll make circles and hope we catch them. I can't think of any other way. He looked at the teenagers helplessly. No one moved. Despite Clay's new plan, John could feel it in the air. They had all surrendered. I don't know what else to do. Clay's voice had lost its strength. I might, John said abruptly, the idea forming even as he spoke. Maybe we can ask them. You want to ask them? Jessica said sarcastically. Let's call them and leave a message. Please call us back with your murderous plot at your earliest convenience. Exactly, John said. Clay, the mascots from Freddy's. Are they all gone? When you say you threw them out, what does that mean? Can we get access to them? He turned to Jessica. They helped us before, or at least they tried to. Once they stopped trying to kill us, they might know something. I don't know. Even if they're on a scrap heap somewhere, there must be something left. Clay? Clay had turned his face up to the sky again. Jessica gave him a sharp look. You know, don't you? She said. You know where they are. Clay sighed. Yeah. I know where they are. He hesitated. I couldn't let them be dismantled. He went on. Not knowing what they are, who they had been, and I didn't dare let them be casually tossed out, considering what they're capable of doing. Jessica opened her mouth, about to ask a question, then stopped herself. I kept them, Clay said. There was a rare note of uncertainty in his voice. You what? John stepped forward, suddenly on guard. I kept them. All of them. I didn't know about asking them any questions, though. Ever since that night, they hadn't moved an inch. They're broken. Or at least, they're doing a good impression of it. They've been sitting in my basement for over a year now. I've been careful to leave them alone. It just seemed like they shouldn't be disturbed. Well, we have to disturb them, Jessica said. We have to try to find Charlie. John scarcely heard her. He was staring searchingly at Clay. Come on, Clay said. He set off toward his car with a heavy look, as if something had just been taken from him. John and Jessica exchanged a glance, then followed. Before they reached Jessica's car, Clay was already heading toward the main road. Jessica stepped on the gas, catching up just as Clay made a sharp right turn. They didn't speak. Jessica was intent on the road, and John was slouched in his seat, thinking things through. Ahead of them, Clay had switched on his flashing lights, though he left off the siren. John stared into the darkness as they drove. Maybe he'd spot Charlie just by chance. He kept his hand loose on the door handle, ready to jump out, to run and save her. But there were only endless trees, scattered with the orange windows of distant houses, which hung on the hills like Christmas lights. We're here, Jessica said, sooner than John had expected. John pushed himself upright and peered out the window. She made a left turn and slowed the car down, and as she did, John recognized it. A few yards ahead was Carlton's house, surrounded by a cove of trees. Clay pulled into the driveway, and they came in behind him. Jessica stopped the car inches from his bumper. Clay jangled his keys nervously as they approached the house. He looked like an altered man, no longer the assured police chief in control of every situation. He unlocked the door, but John hung back. He wanted Clay to go in first. Clay led them into the living room, and Jessica made a noise of surprise. Clay gave her a sheepish look. "Sorry for the mess," he said. John glanced around. The room was mostly the same as he remembered, full of couches and chairs, all fanned around a fireplace. But both couches were piled with open files and stacks of newspaper, and what looked like dirty laundry. 6 coffee mugs sat crowded together on a single end table. John's heart sank as he noticed 2 bottles of whiskey lying on their sides between an armchair and the hearth. He cast his eyes around quickly, spotting 2 more. One had rolled under a couch. The other was still half full, sitting beside a glass with a distinct yellow tinge. John snuck a look at Jessica, who bit her lip. "What happened here?" she asked. "Betty left," Clay said shortly. "Oh, I'm sorry," John offered. Clay waved a hand at him, staving off further attempts at comfort. He cleared his throat. "She was right, I guess. Or at least, she did what was right for her." He forced a laugh and gestured at the mess that surrounded him. "We all do what we have to do." He sat down in a green armchair, the only seat completely free of paperwork and debris, and shook his head. "Can I move these?" John asked, pointing to the papers that filled the couch opposite Clay. Clay didn't respond, so John stacked them up and put them to one side, careful not to let anything fall. He sat, and after a moment, so did Jessica, though she eyed the couch as if she thought it might be carrying the plague. "Clay," John started, but the older man started talking again, as if he'd never stopped. "After all of you left, after all of you were safe, I went back for them. Betty and I decided it might be a good time for Carlton to get out of town for a while. So she took him to stay with her sister for a few weeks. To be honest, I don't remember if she suggested it, or if it was me who put the idea in her mind. But as soon as I saw them pull down the driveway, and out of sight. I got to work. Freddy's was locked up. They'd taken away Officer Dunn's body and completed the search. Under my careful guidance, of course. They took some samples, but nothing else had been removed from the premises. Not yet. They were waiting on me to give the go-ahead. The place wasn't even under guard. After all, there was nothing dangerous inside, right? So, I waited for things to calm down. Then I drove to St. George and rented a U-Haul. It was raining when I picked up the truck, and by the time I got to Freddy's, there was a full-on thunderstorm. Even though the forecast had been clear, I had keys this time. All the locks were police issued now, so I just walked right into the place. I knew where I would find them, or at least, I knew where I'd left them and prayed they were still there. They were all piled together in that room, with a little stage. "Pirate's Cove," Jessica said, her voice barely a whisper. I half expected them to be gone, but they were sitting patiently, like they'd been waiting for me. They're immense, you know? Hundreds of pounds of metal and whatever else was in there. So I had to drag them one by one. I loaded them all up eventually. Figured I would bring them down through the storm cellar. But when I got back home, the lights were on, and Betty's car was in the driveway. She'd come back from her trip early, it seemed. "What did you do?" Jessica asked. She was hunched over, her chin in her palms. John shook his head, mildly amused. She was enjoying the story. I waited across the street. I watched the lights, staking out my own house. When the last light went out, I pulled into the driveway and started dragging those things again, lowering them down into the cellar, one by one. I drove the truck back to St. George and came back home, all without anyone seeing me. It would have never worked if I hadn't had the cover of thunder and lightning to mask what I was doing. When I came in, I was soaking wet and my whole body ached. All I wanted was to go upstairs to bed, next to my wife. He cleared his throat. But I didn't care. I took a blanket and I slept in front of the basement door, just in case something tried to come out. "Did it?" Jessica asked. Clay shook his head slowly back and forth, like it had taken on extra weight. In the morning, they were exactly the way I'd left them. Every night after that, I went down there when Betty was asleep. I watched them. Sometimes I even talk to them, trying to provoke them somehow. I wanted to make sure they weren't going to kill us in our sleep. I went back over the case files, trying to figure out how we'd missed Afton. How had he managed to come back without anyone suspecting? Betty could tell something was wrong. A few weeks later, she woke up and came looking for me. She found me. And them. Burke closed his eyes. I don't remember exactly how the conversation went, but the next morning, she was gone again. And this time, she didn't come back. John shifted on the couch restlessly. "They haven't moved since then? They're just sitting there, like broken dolls. I don't even think about them anymore." "Clay, Charlie's in danger," John said, standing. "We have to go see them." Clay nodded. "Well, then, let's go see them." He stood and gestured toward the kitchen. The last time John had stood in the Burke's kitchen was the morning after they'd all escaped from Freddy's. Clay had been making pancakes and kidding around. Betty, Carlton's mother, was sitting next to her son, as if she were afraid to leave his side. They were all giddy with relief that the ordeal was over. But John could tell that each of them, in their own particular ways, was struggling with other emotions, too. Someone might stop talking in mid-sentence, forgetting the rest, or stare for several moments at the empty air in front of them. They were all just barely recovering, but the kitchen had been bright. Lights sparkled off the counters, and the smells of coffee and pancakes were reassuring, a connection to reality. Now, John was struck hard by the contrast. There was a rank smell, and he could see immediately what it was. The counters and table were strewn with dirty dishes, all crusted with leftover meals. Most had scarcely been eaten. There were 2 more empty bottles in the kitchen sink. Clay opened the door to what looked like a closet, but turned out to be the basement steps. He flipped a light switch, illuminating a dim bulb right above the stairs, and motioned them in. Jessica started forward, but John put a hand lightly on her arm, stopping her. Clay went first, leading their descent